I used to think the hardest silence was the one that follows gunfire. Turns out, the hardest silence is the one that sits on your porch at Christmas when your own son won't open the door. The December air in Virginia had that sharp edge. Clean, cold, familiar. My boots crunched over the frost as I stood there, one hand holding a small wrap box, the other tucked deep in my jacket pocket. The lights from his living room glowed soft through the curtains. I could see the shape of a tree twinkling with ornaments that used to hang in our old house when his mother was still alive, but the door stayed shut. I'd been gone for 12 months, Kuwait, then Jordan, running logistics for a joint training unit. It wasn't combat, but it wasn't easy either. Every sunrise over that desert, I'd think of home, of my son, Mark, of the promise I made to come back in one piece this time. And I did. What I didn't expect was to be the ghost standing on his own son's porch, listening to the muffled sound of laughter inside. Laughter that didn't include me. I rang the bell once more, waited, then called his phone. One ring, two, straight to voicemail. I tried again, same thing. It wasn't anger that hit me first. It was confusion. That kind of quiet disbelief that comes from thinking you know someone's heart and realizing you might not anymore. I set the little box down on the porch railing. Inside was his grandfather's old pocket watch. The one I'd carried through 2 deployments and 3 continents. I had planned to hand it to him myself, maybe over coffee, maybe with a laugh about how the damn thing still ticked better than I did. Instead, I stood there in uniform, under the soft hum of Christmas lights, wondering if the man inside even remembered what that watch meant. When I finally turned away, the cold bit through the fabric of my jacket. I walked down the driveway, past the new truck I hadn't helped him buy, and climbed into my own old Chevy. The seat creaked the way it always did. I started the engine, the headlights cutting through the fog, and sat there for a while, watching the house I used to be welcome in. Then I drove home. The road back to my cabin was quiet, the kind of quiet you only notice after a year of sandstorms, radio chatter, and the constant buzz of bass generators. My hands relaxed on the wheel as miles of blacktop rolled beneath me. Every few minutes, I glance at my phone on the passenger seat. No calls, no messages, just that same stillness that seems to hum when you're all alone. I reached my driveway close to midnight. The house was dark, just as I'd left it a year ago. A folded flag sat framed on the mantel. My wife's, not mine. Cancer took her 10 Christmases ago, when Mark was still a teenager. That year I promised him we'd always keep the light on for her. Guess somewhere along the way, that light went out. I hung my coat on the same hook it had always hung on, took off my boots, and sat down at the kitchen table. I poured a bit of coffee from the pot I'd brewed before leaving that morning. Cold, bitter, perfect. And for the first time in months, I let myself feel tired. Not just in the body, in the bones. The kind of tired you carry when you've spent a lifetime keeping your word, only to realize no one was listening. I thought about calling again, just once more. But pride and pain make a strong mix, and I'd had enough of both. So instead, I opened the small tin box where I keep letters from old friends. Brothers I served with who never got their Christmas homecoming men, who'd give anything for another chance to knock on a door that stayed closed. Perspective. That's what the Army teaches you. Doesn't matter how bad your day is, someone else would trade places in a heartbeat. So I told myself it was fine. Maybe Mark was busy. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Maybe. I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, the kind of sleep where your heart stays awake even when your eyes are closed. When dawn came, the phone was still silent. But by that same time the next night, 24 hours later, it wasn't silent anymore. The first thing I heard when I woke up wasn't birds or the wind against the cabin windows. It was the sound of my phone vibrating on the kitchen counter. Steady, insistent, like an alarm that wouldn't quit. 86 missed calls. The last one came through at 3:27 a.m. I rubbed my eyes, trying to make sense of the number glowing on the screen. My son's name, Mark. For a few seconds, I just stared at it. You'd think after a year in the desert I'd be jumpy about emergencies, but no. I was calm. Too calm. When you've spent enough nights waiting for bad news, you learn to let the quiet carry it first. The voicemail icon blinked. I hit play. Dad, please, call me back. I didn't know you'd come by. I swear I didn't. Something happened. Just, please call me. His voice cracked halfway through. That same voice that once yelled touchdown in the backyard when he was 10. That same voice that hadn't said Merry Christmas. Dad, in years. I sat down, phone still in my hand, staring at the wall clock ticking softly above the sink. The smell of cold coffee filled the room. Something had shifted. When I finally called him back, he picked up on the first ring. Dad? Oh, thank God. I've been calling all night. Why didn't you answer? Wasn't expecting a reason to, I said quietly. He exhaled hard, like someone who'd been holding his breath for hours. Dad, look, I'm sorry about last night, about the house, about not answering. I didn't know you were coming. That's fine, Mark. I don't hold it against you. But I did. Deep down, I did. He kept talking, fast, nervous, the way soldiers talk when they know they've messed up, but hope the damage isn't permanent. It wasn't like that, I swear. Isabella, sorry, I mean Emily, she invited her folks at the last minute. They didn't want anyone else there. It was complicated. Complicated. That word again. The modern version of cowardice with context. I let the silence stretch. He filled it, of course. Dad, you're the reason we even have this house. You helped with the down payment. You covered the mortgage when things got rough after the layoffs. You've done more than enough. Mark, I said, cutting him off gently. How many payments do I make a month for you? He paused. 2,600. Every month. For how long now? 3 years. And how many of those payments have you ever thanked me for? He didn't answer. Didn't have to. That's when something clicked in me. Something that had been building since the day I'd first signed the co-loan papers to help him get on his feet. Helping him had turned into caring him. When I came back from deployment, I expected to see the man I raised. Instead, I found someone who didn't open the door because the people inside might think I didn't belong there. I looked out the window. Frost still clung to the trees. Somewhere in the distance, church bells were ringing. Dad, I'm really sorry, he said again. Can we just talk about this later? Maybe you can come by next week. We'll have dinner. I'll make it right. I could hear his wife whispering in the background. Something about keeping it short, and that was enough. No need, son, I said, voice steady. You don't owe me dinner. I've already given you enough. Dad, what does that mean? It means it's time you learned what happens when the money stops coming from somewhere you forgot to respect. He started to say something, but I'd already ended the call. I opened my laptop, logged into my bank account, and stared at the automatic transfer that had gone out on the 15th of every month for 3 years. The same one that kept his lights on, his driveway clear, his mortgage paid. I hovered the cursor over cancel recurring payment. The little box popped up. Are you sure you want to stop this transfer? Yes, I clicked it, and just like that, 3 years of quiet sacrifice came to an end. The silence afterward wasn't bitter. It was clean. I leaned back in my chair, exhaled, and looked around my cabin. The peeling paint, the drafty windows, the empty picture frames still waiting for photos I'd never printed. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Every board, every nail, every payment made by my own hands. For the first time since my wife passed, I felt the weight lift. That night, I went for a walk down to the frozen lake behind the house. The moonlight scattered across the ice like 1,000 tiny metals pinned to a still surface. I thought about all the men I'd served with, the ones who never made it home to a front porch or a son's voice on the other end of a phone. Men who didn't get the luxury of learning hard lessons about family. Compared to that, my pain was small, manageable. By the time I got back, my phone was lighting up again, Mark calling, then again, and again. I let it ring. For once, I wasn't the one answering the call. The third day after Christmas was gray and heavy, the kind of winter day that feels like the whole world is holding its breath. The snow from the week before had hardened into icy ridges along my driveway, and the pines behind the cabin bent slightly under the cold. I was at the kitchen table, oiling my old service pistol. a habit more than a necessity, when I heard tires crunching up the gravel. Slow, cautious. Then came the knock. 3 short, nervous taps. I didn't move at first, just listened. Sometimes silence tells you more than words ever could. I wiped my hands, set the pistol aside, and walked to the door. Through the window, I saw a familiar figure standing there, bundled in a coat that looked too new for the weather, my son Mark. I opened the door. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him. Eyes red, jaw tight, like a man who hadn't slept since the world shifted under his feet. "Dad," he said, voice small against the wind. "We need to talk." I stepped aside. "Then come in." He entered slowly, scanning the cabin like he was seeing it for the first time. The coffee can full of spare nails on the counter, the faded flag above the mantel, the boots by the door. He used to run through this place as a kid, pretending it was a fort. Now he stood like a visitor. "Coffee?" I asked. He nodded, sitting at the table. His hands were trembling. When I placed the mug in front of him, he didn't touch it, just stared at the steam rising from it like it might carry the right words if he waited long enough. Finally, he said it. "You canceled the payments." I didn't answer right away. I'd learned a long time ago that quiet often says more than shouting. He continued, words tumbling out faster now. "Dad, you can't just do that. The bank called yesterday. They said we're in default. If we don't pay by the 10th, they'll start foreclosure proceedings. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking," I said slowly, "that maybe it was time my son learned what it feels like to stand on his own 2 feet. His eyes flashed. Anger, disbelief, maybe guilt. "You're punishing me for not opening the door? For one mistake?" "One mistake?" I leaned back in my chair. "You shut me out of your house, Mark. You pretended I wasn't standing there in the cold on Christmas after a year away serving my country. And you want to call that a mistake?" He ran his hands through his hair, frustrated. "Dad, you don't understand. Emily's parents—" I cut him off. "I understand perfectly. You were embarrassed. You thought an old soldier from Virginia wasn't polished enough for your in-laws' dinner table." "That's not fair," he snapped. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" I asked quietly. The silence stretched between us, thick as the cold air outside. He couldn't look at me. His voice finally cracked when he spoke again. "They think you're rough around the edges. Not the kind of person they'd invite to their home." I laughed once. Dry, humorless, rough around the edges. That's one way to describe 25 years of service. I've been called worse. He flinched. "I didn't say that, Dad. I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did. Maybe not in words, but you meant it when you didn't open that door." He sank into his chair, guilt finally catching up to pride. For a moment, he looked like the boy who used to fall asleep in my lap during thunderstorms, the one who used to say he wanted to be brave like Dad. "Do you know why I kept paying your mortgage?" I asked. He shook his head. "Because that house, your house, was supposed to be the one thing I could give you that no one could take away. I didn't want you to worry about what I worried about at your age. I wanted you to build a life, a family, something solid. But you can't build anything worth keeping if you forget who helped you lay the foundation." He swallowed hard. "Dad, I didn't mean to hurt you." "I know," I said softly. "But you did." He rubbed his face, exhausted. "I'll figure it out. I'll talk to the bank. Maybe I can refinance or—" "That's what grown men do," I said, finishing my coffee. "They figure it out." He looked up, eyes glassy. "You really won't help?" "Mark, I spent a lifetime helping people who didn't ask for it. Soldiers under my command, civilians who needed protection, even my own son when he wasn't ready for responsibility. But there comes a day when help becomes a leash, and I won't put that around your neck anymore." He stared at me, speechless. For a second, I thought he might shout, or plead, or storm out. Instead, he whispered, "Mom would have wanted you to help." That one cut deep. I turned my gaze to the framed photo of her on the wall. "Your mother believed in helping people who help themselves. She wouldn't have wanted me to be anyone's safety net forever." He stood, shoulders slumped, defeated. "I guess that's it then." "That's it," I said quietly. He nodded once, put on his gloves, and walked toward the door. The wind howled when he opened it, carrying the sound of his footsteps back into the cabin long after he was gone. When the silence finally returned, I sat there alone, staring at the empty coffee mug across from me. It hurt, more than I'd ever admit. But sometimes love means letting someone fall just long enough to remember how to stand outside. The snow had started again. Light, steady, almost peaceful. And somewhere down the mountain, my son was learning what it meant to be his father's son. Winter dragged on longer than usual that year. The snow in the pines never seemed to melt, and the days all blurred into one another. After Mark left that morning, I didn't hear from him for weeks. No calls, no messages. Just the quiet kind of distance that comes when pride stands between two people who love each other, but don't know how to say so. I filled the time with small things. Fixing the porch step, reorganizing the shed, helping a neighbor down the road clear his driveway after the last storm. You'd be surprised how much purpose a man can find in the rhythm of simple work. But every night, when I sat at that same kitchen table, there was always an empty chair across from me. The one where my son had sat with his coffee, too proud to ask for forgiveness, and me too proud to offer it by mid-January. I figured he'd sorted himself out or lost the house. Either way, it wasn't my business anymore. I'd made my peace with that, or so I told myself. Then one evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and the sky turned that strange steel blue color that comes before nightfall, there was another knock on my door. It wasn't nervous this time. It was steady, firm. I opened the door, and there he was again, my son. Only this time, he looked different, not defeated, not angry, just real. His coat was worn, his face tired, but there was a kind of humility in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. "Evening, Dad," he said softly. "Evening," I replied. "Come in before you freeze." He stepped inside, rubbing his hands together for warmth. I poured 2 cups of coffee, habit again, and slid one across the table. He smiled a little. "Guess I needed that." "Looks like it," I said. We sat in silence for a while, the kind that's not uncomfortable, just waiting for the right words to find their place. Finally he spoke. "We sold the house." I looked up, surprised but not shocked. "I figured something like that might happen." He nodded. "It was the only way I took a job up in Richmond. Smaller place, just an apartment for now. It's not much, but it's mine. And I'm paying for it myself." There was no bitterness in his voice, just quiet acceptance. The sound of a man who'd finally decided to stand up straight. "I'm proud of you," I said simply. He looked at me, unsure if he'd heard right. "You are?" "Of course. You finally learned the one thing every soldier has to learn before anything else. Self-reliance." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I guess I had to get knocked around a little to figure that out." "Most of us do," I said. He hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, familiar box. The one I'd left on his porch that Christmas Eve. "You left this behind," he said quietly. "I did," I replied. "Figured you didn't want it." He set it gently on the table, sliding it toward me. "I didn't deserve it then, but I do now." I opened the lid. Inside, the old pocket watch gleamed faintly in the dim light. The same one my father had given me before I shipped off to Vietnam. The same one that had ticked through every deployment, every loss, every homecoming. It still worked, steady as ever. "You kept it safe," I said. He nodded. "I carried it every day after you left. Reminded me that time doesn't stop for anyone. Not even for pride." Something in my chest loosened, like a knot finally giving way. "Your grandfather used to say the same thing," I said. "Said that a man's worth isn't in what he owns, but in how he earns back what he's lost." Mark looked up, eyes glassy. "Dad, I lost your trust, and I don't expect to get it back overnight. But I'm going to earn it, the right way." I stared at him for a long moment, seeing not the boy I'd raised, but the man he'd finally become. "Then you already have." The silence that followed wasn't the cold kind. It was warm, full of something close to forgiveness. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling. "Emily left," he said after a moment. "When the house went, so did she. Her parents blamed me for everything. Guess they figured I was useless without your help." I sipped my coffee. "People like that don't know what strength looks like until they lose comfort. You'll be better off without that weight." He nodded. Maybe. It hurts, though. Of course it does, I said. Growth always hurts. We talked for another hour. Not about money or mistakes, but about life, about Mom. About the things we'd both done wrong. He told me about his new job, about fixing computers for a logistics company, about saving up for something of his own. There was pride in his voice, the good kind. When he finally stood to leave, he paused by the door. "You'll come visit, right? Richmond's not far." I smiled faintly. "Maybe next Christmas." He grinned, understanding the weight of those words. "Then I'll make sure the door's open." After he drove off, I sat back down at the table and wound the old pocket watch. The steady tick filled the quiet house. For the first time in years, it didn't sound like a countdown. It sounded like a heartbeat. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and slow, covering the tracks of the truck that had just left. I raised my cup toward the empty chair across from me and said quietly, "You did good, son." And for the first time since coming home, I meant it.